The Zelda series has always been the gold standard for the gaming industry, and I don't just say that because Nintendo releases each game on a gold-printed disc or cartridge. The original Legend of Zelda is one of the first examples of an open-world adventure, a genre that has never been more relevant in today's gaming economy. When the series was forced to make the jump to the third dimension, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time wrote the book on how to lead a player with expert 3D level design. After years of releasing one critical darling after another, it didn't take long for Nintendo to hone in on what made a Zelda game, and the result was a formula describing the various pieces needed to build an experience worthy of legends. So when the 14th installment of the franchise finally released in 2011 for the Nintendo Wii, controversy was the last thing anyone expected when it came to the critical reception of The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. In fact, for the majority of critics, there were no faults with the game in any regard. And why should there be? Skyward Sword was the textbook definition of a Zelda game, a shining example of the treasured formula in action. More than this, it introduced seemingly monumental twists and spins to several cornerstones of the series, none more obvious than the revised combat of the game. Wii Motion Plus, a gyroscope attachment to the Wiimote controller that released a year prior, was a requirement to play Skyward Sword, and with it came the promise of true one-to-one sword swing in action. No easy feat, even by today's technical standards. What could possibly have been the problem? I remember being just as surprised as many of you probably were 6 years ago when GameSpot, one of the most popular game reviewing sites on the web, gave Skyward Sword one of the lowest scores among their peers, a 7.5 out of 10. Albeit laughable to consider such a seemingly high score a controversy, it was the clear outlier among a sea of endless praise. Skyward Sword received 27 perfect scores and many, many more that were near perfect. So why did Tom McShay decide to buck the trend and forego the measly 2.5 points? Well, if you ask the vocal commenters and forum posters at the time, a colorful spectrum of reasons. Tom clearly did not understand how a Wiimote worked, some roared. He must have not played the game at all. Readers of the site demanded a re-review and spouted on about how shameful it was that GameSpot would even post such a review, due to Skyward Sword deserving a 9.5 minimum. Even other critics capitalized on the frenzy, posting responses to Tom's top criticisms and how-to videos with the honorable goal of teaching Tom how to play the game he sorely misunderstood at a fundamental level. Besides the obvious response that each critic is entitled to their own subjective opinion on any particular game, was there some truth to the madness? Could Tom truly have been so off base? Now that the waters have settled and emotions have been spent, we stand on the eve of the next iteration for the series, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, a game that shares very little with Skyward Sword and seems to have taken the plunge to break the tried and true formula that McShay criticized in his review. The buzz and excitement surrounding Breath of the Wild is electrifying, and so in this calm of what is expected to be a game-changing storm, it feels justified to take a look back at one of the most controversial and divisive Zelda entries in the franchise's 30-year history. If Skyward Sword is going to be remembered for anything, it will likely be remembered for its control scheme. Although the previous entry in the series, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, will always technically be the first Zelda game with motion controls, Skyward Sword was entirely born and curated in the era of the Wii, an era where Nintendo strived for universal accessibility and new ways to interact with video games. With this in mind, it should be no surprise that the game practically oozes with motion controls at every corner, the most striking transformation being how combat is handled throughout the experience. The Wii Motion Plus attachment follows the player's arm and wrist movements, allowing for true one-to-one motion tracking with Link's sword. Gone are the days where simple patience and timing were enough to defeat an enemy. Bokoblins will cycle through various sword positions, requiring you to strike from specific directions in order to land a hit. Skulltulas need to be flipped onto their back with an upward swing, allowing Link to penetrate their underbellies with a subsequent downward thrust. The controls can feel so instinctive at times that it can be hard to believe that a Zelda game ever lived without them. Impressive as the controls may seem, they are not without their flaws. The occasional swing or thrust will be misinterpreted by the game, but ultimately, the accuracy of the gyroscope was not a cause of frustration for me during any of my playthroughs of Skyward Sword. A realization has to be made when playing Skyward Sword that partaking in combat is very much an acceptance that you are interacting with a system with constraints, much like many other Wii games. It's not an actual tennis racket in Wii Sports, it's not a steering wheel in Mario Kart, and it's not a true blade in Skyward Sword. The Zelda team understood this, which is why the majority of enemies are strikingly easy to defeat. Battles ultimately ended up feeling very much like a virtual version of Bop It, where my opponent would reveal a painfully obvious direction to swing in with plenty of time to spare. Left swing. Right swing. Center. 5 correct in a row, and I'm still fighting the same Stalfos. Lack of tension becomes a real issue with these easier fights. There are exceptions to this, my favorite being a sweat-dripping duel with a skeleton pirate on the plank of his ship, which required me to successfully execute a flurry of sword swings in order to push him off the edge and into the depths below. A misread meant I was shoved backwards and just 1 inch closer to my own defeat. Too few are these experiences though, and it really made me wonder if Skyward Sword stayed too far away from the potential of one-to-one sword dueling in hopes of keeping frustration to a minimum. Although Link's sword definitely got the star treatment when it comes to motion controls, Nintendo left no stone unturned when it came to the rest of Skyward Sword's gameplay mechanics. Many actions are arguably enhanced by this commitment to motion. The combat, swimming, flying, and being able to roll or throw bombs are a few of the highlights which come to mind. I just wish the train had stopped there. Throwing my controller around my body so that the game can lazily rotate the first-person camera is intrusive. Eagerly reaching the end of a temple only to be halted at the boss door because boss keys have turned into virtual Rubik's Cubes that need to be carefully turned and twisted to fit ridiculously retrofitted keyholes is deflating. Meticulously rocking my upright Wiimote side to artificially bounce Link on a tightrope is flat out stupid. Nowhere is the sentiment more prevalent than with Link's bow and other items within his arsenal this time around. Although Twilight Princess was heavily criticized for having tacked on motion controls, the way it handled aiming was a shining example of how the unique capabilities of the Wii could improve more traditional gameplay experiences. The Wii's infrared sensors allowed me to point at the screen with a precision rivaled only by mouse and keyboard controls on a PC. Removing these controls entirely in favor of re-implementing them with the new tech introduced by Wii Motion Plus was a baffling decision. By the time the development of Skyward Sword was just getting started, the Wii had proven itself to be a monstrous success in attracting a new, more casual audience. When the game finally released in 2011, the console had sold over 90 million units, with games like Mario Kart Wii, Wii Sports Resort, and a Wii Fit, each achieving sales totaling more than what the GameCube sold throughout its entire lifetime. Nintendo's commitment to making games for everyone could not be understated, and adapting the Zelda formula to be more accessible is exactly what Skyward Sword aimed to do. The changes are instantly recognizable. An entire Wiimote and nunchuck are displayed as part of the UI to ensure that you know where every button is and what every button does at all times. My favorite being the 2 button, which is entirely dedicated to displaying trivial instructions throughout the entirety of the game. Fans of the series will immediately notice that Link's starting health jumped from 3 to 6 hearts. Sheikah Stones provide video hints on how to solve the majority of quests, and dungeons have multiple save points scattered throughout so that you never lose your place. It's not all bad though. Skyward Sword introduces multiple game mechanics that aid in establishing a more dynamic sense of challenge and difficulty. Many of Link's items can now be upgraded by scavenging for bugs and treasures hidden across the game world. Link also carries a customizable item pouch that allows you to fill your inventory with a mishmash of carry-ons that suit your playstyle. These mechanics mesh well together to offer a happy compromise for anyone playing the game. Newbies prone to taking damage can upgrade their shield and stock up on potions and heart medallions, an item that gives Link an additional heart piece when equipped, while veterans may risk foregoing these defensive items and instead choose a setup centered around speed and treasure hunting. I personally focused on combat efficiency and decided to upgrade my bow into the illustrious Sacred Bow so that I could deal more damage from afar. Unfortunately, I never felt like I ever truly needed any of the bonuses that came along with customizing my item pouch or improving a weapon. The same can be said for potions. Rarely did I find myself in a situation where I needed more hearts, and even when I did, the occasional fairy was more than enough to keep me alive. Each time a shopkeeper told me I was a few treasures short to enhance a quiver, or I'd collected too few bugs to boost the stamina potion, I casually shrugged and moved on. Yet perhaps the ultimate concession made for the sake of clarity and accessibility is Link's mentor companion in Skyward Sword, Fi. As much as Zelda fans love to poke fun at Navi's overbearing and relentlessly bothersome advice, Fi is easily the worst companion character Link has ever had. Fi is cold and robotic. Her advice is both blaringly obvious and severely unwanted. Countless times throughout the game, an NPC would tell me exactly where to go, only for Fi to immediately stop me and tell me that there was a 95% chance that heading in that exact direction would progress the story. At times, she decided to quiz me with multiple choice questions on the current state of the plot. If I answered incorrectly, Fi would politely tell me I was wrong, often spouting probability figures to show how wrong I was. In fact, she will tell you the probability of just about everything, a worthless tactic since I couldn't recall a single instance that her odds were ever beaten. What's frustrating is that Fi does not really serve a purpose that could not have been handled by other characters or events in the game. Her role in the story is to deliver exposition to the player that easily could have been given by Zelda's father Gapora, the old lady who turns out to be Impa, or even the goddess Hylia herself, who is an expert at leaving magical tomes and singing statues, but for some reason requires a middleman to translate all of these things for Link. Fi makes no character progression and has no arc, likely due to the fact that she's essentially a robot with no personality. Despite all of this, Skyward Sword expects you to be saddened by the emotional parting at the end of the game, which was unquestionably unearned as Link and Fi never share a single moment of character development. Unrelated to the story, Fi can offer hints when you get stuck. These hints are often just a vague rewording of the previous story beats without offering much value in terms of help. This is probably because the Fortune Teller and Sheikah Stones already offer exhaustively extensive hints and clues, causing Fi's advice to suffer as to not undermine these other player resources. There is one thing Fi can do that is uniquely her own, and that's a little something called dowsing. When Fi permits you, Link's sword will be able to pick up on the divine spiritual signatures left by a whole plethora of characters and items to help you find stuff hidden within the game world. By pointing your Wiimote at the screen, the aiming reticle will flicker when it is facing the same direction as the object that you are looking for. Like Fi, this is overly unnecessary, as Skyward Sword's landscapes were designed to be small, isolated, and linear, in contrast to Twilight Princess's vast and fairly empty version of Hyrule. Simply idly exploring the area I was in was more than enough to tunnel me into the right direction to progress the story without needing to play hot and cold with Fi to tell me if my next step was one that was closer or further away from Zelda. For a series that has built its foundation on the idea of open world exploration, it can be hard to believe at times that Skyward Sword is of the same lineage. Whether or not you like dowsing or the new Wii Motion Plus combat, there is no denying that Skyward Sword has put a lot of effort into innovating when it comes to controls and accessibility. In truth, every Zelda game releases with a fresh take on new game mechanics, storylines, art styles, and control schemes, but at the heart of each one lies the Zelda formula. Since the solidification of the formula with Ocarina of Time, each iteration in the series has mapped their gameplay experiences and world designs around familiar beats. The games are centered around a handful of dungeons scattered about the world map. Dungeons must be conquered in a predetermined order, where Link will enter a new area, complete a task which will open the way to the nearby dungeon, defeat the dungeon, and then be pointed to the next area. Zelda games are typically split into two acts, the first act concluding after Link has completed the first 3 dungeons, after which Link obtains something, usually the Master Sword, that allows him to complete the remainder of the dungeons in the second act. Occasionally, there is a third act, where Link must go on one last chase around the map to prepare for the finale. Now that Link has conquered each of the dungeons and proved his worthiness as the destined hero, he can defeat the evil that plagues the land and restore peace. Although Skyward Sword shares the most similarities with The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, a game that has strayed the furthest from the formula, it holds firmly onto the gameplay beats described above. Very much like Majora's Mask's Termina, Skyloft acts as the sole major town residing in the middle of the world map. Surrounding Skyloft is a sea of clouds filled with floating islands. Think The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Link can fly atop his Loftwing from island to island, or fall down onto the surface where most of the actual adventuring happens. Unlike Termina, the town of Skyloft is rather drab, offering very little to actually do. Besides an almost always empty bazaar of shops, the only thing to really do in Skyloft are side quests. The side quests in Majora's Mask were what really made the one-town system succeed, as they were engaging and complex thanks to the game's 3-day time mechanic. Skyloft side quests are quirky spins on fetch quests that lack imagination, challenge, and worthwhile rewards. Soaring around Skyloft is even more depressing, as only 6 of the 40+ floating islands contain some sort of main story or side activity. The rest of the islands are either completely empty or contain goddess chests, a spin on a regular Zelda chest except for the fact that you can't open it until you have found the corresponding goddess cube in one of the locations down on the surface. This leaves little reason to explore the majority of the sky, since all of its secrets are locked away. Out of the 6 islands remaining, 3 are minigames, 1 is an island solely used to deliver exposition for the main story, 1 provides a start for yet another fetch quest, and the Lumpy Pumpkin, the sole standout island that contains its own secrets and side quests that vary slightly from the usual formula. The majority of time I found myself on my Loftwing flying over Skyloft, it was a straight beeline from one surface waypoint to the next. Below the clouds, you'll be exploring one of just 3 areas: Faron Woods, Elden Volcano, and Lorenu Desert. Of the 3 environments, Lorenu Desert is the clear standout, as the forest and volcano themes are a tired repetition for the Zelda series. Dry and bland as a desert may sound, Skyward Sword shakes things up with its introduction of time shift stones, crystallized triggers that can transform their immediate surroundings back into the distant past. These time shift mechanics can turn a barren and lifeless platform into an oasis with lush trees, gushing water, and resurrected life forms who immediately return to dust and bone when lured out too far away from the stones. Seeing this all happen in real time with the added contrast of the desert as a backdrop has a certain wow factor that is a clear standout for the series. Each time I returned to Lorenu Desert, I always found new places to explore, treasures to collect, and dungeons that were the best designed in Skyward Sword. The same can't be said for Faron Woods and Elden Volcano, which both drop the ball when it comes to discovering variety each time you visit, an important attribute in Skyward Sword because in order to complete the game, you have to visit each location at least 3 times. I don't inherently have a problem with this concept from a layout standpoint. Other games in the series have tinkered with the idea of returning to the same locations multiple times, and if done correctly, it allows the player to gain a level of mastery in an area by the game's completion. The new Silent Realm segments are a great example of this. Part of Link's second visit to each of the 3 main areas begins with the Silent Realm trial that forced me to frantically dodge, sprint, jump, and tumble to hunt for Tears of the Goddess scattered around an area that I had previously explored during my last visit. Guardians of these tears are strategically placed to make your trial more difficult, and discovering the optimal route to collect each tier while avoiding these guardians required a healthy understanding of the map layout. I just wish the execution for the rest of the game was as well thought out as these segments. Per formulaic tradition, I was always forced to complete some task, no matter how menial, before I was allowed to get to a temple. Why do I need to collect 5 pieces of a temple entrance key after I've already had to figure out how to climb to the top of the volcano in the first place? After completing Faron Woods' Silent Realm trial, opening the path to Lake Floria, and discovering the entrance to the next temple, why do I have to walk all the way across the forest and through the entirety of the first temple in the game just to collect sacred water in a bottle? After completing Elden Volcano's Silent Realm trial and discovering the entrance to the Fire Sanctuary Temple, why does the summit conveniently decide to become hostile so that I'm forced to retread the same path up the volcano while protecting an NPC character that previously had no problem with the volcano on 2 separate occasions? Skyward Sword is always taking things just one step too far because it feels like it has to. The entire third act of the game proved to be the most aggravating hours of blatant filler content that I've played in any game, period. For context, although I've already found Zelda, obtained the Goddess Sword, transformed the Goddess Sword into the Master Sword, and have proven myself worthy of wielding the Triforce itself, I still needed to return to each of the 3 provinces to learn the different parts of the Song of the Hero, so that I can find the Triforce. Each area has a dragon who carries the responsibility of teaching the destined hero their part of the song. So after the 3rd boss battle with the Imprisoned, the 2nd battle with him in less than an hour, I find that all of Faron Woods has been flooded by the Water Dragon. When I finally approach the Water Dragon, the same Water Dragon whose life I've saved the last time I was here, the same Water Dragon that witnessed me forging the Master Sword in her forest, the same Water Dragon that recognized me as the hero with the spirit of the goddess, and the same Water Dragon whose damn responsibility was to give me the damn part of the song, informs me that she, quote, can't go around giving away something that precious to every hero who flounders into my waters. She splits her song into little tiny note pieces and scatters them around the woods with a hey, go fetch them and then I'll know if you were really serious about all of this. And if it wasn't obvious enough that the developers were trying to waste your time at this point, wait until you finally start searching for these scattered tad tones and realize that for the first time in the game, Fi did not stop you before you started and let you know that you could douse to find what you were looking for. That happens once you're about 3/4 done with collecting these bad boys, and Fi just happens to remember that dowsing was an ability that she had. But you can't douse in the water. And also, why not sharks? Also, they're infinitely spawning sharks. Also, if you don't collect the Tatones fast enough, they'll disappear and you have to collect them again. Skyward Sword is many things, but perfect is not one of them. The disappointing part about all of this is that it didn't need to be this way. Skyward Sword's main story is the longest out of any game in the series. Link seemed to have a weird but refreshing rival that was not another Ganon. The introduction of Fi hinted at an engrossing and rewarding origin story for the Master Sword, but Skyward Sword stuck to what a Zelda game should be instead of what a Zelda game could be. It added length with a completely unnecessary third act because, of course, Link has to go on a quest before he can get a hold of the Triforce. I mean, have you played The Wind Waker? Of course, Garahim was never going to be the true villain, because that spot will always be reserved for Ganon. I mean, have you played Twilight Princess? Of course Link's companion was going to be overbearing and have no impact on the future perception of the Master Sword. I mean, have you played Ocarina of Time? Of course you have to collect these keys before you can enter the temple. Of course you have to learn a musical instrument in order to proceed through the game. Of course, of course, of course. At what point does the series begin to go off course? When Tom McShay posted his review for Skyward Sword, he was lambasted for criticizing Zelda. But if we as a gaming and Zelda community are not willing to criticize a series that we love, then how can we truly appreciate when games get it right? To love something is to see its flaws clearly but accept it for what it is regardless, not to pretend it is flawless. It is with great pride and excitement that I look towards The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Not because it's the same, but because it's different. Because for the first time in a long time, it feels like Zelda is evolving again. Breath of the Wild dares to be different. Skyward Sword dares to add innovation atop an old but faithful horse. Yes, the innovation is all well and good, but at what point do we decide that this tired and beaten up horse is ready to retire? Skyward Sword is not a perfect game. I'm not even sure I would say it's a great game. Skyward Sword is a good game that gave me a twist on more of the same, but I'm ready for the next generation of Zelda. I'm ready for Zelda to have a reason for being printed gold again.